Okay, so it's just about 3 o'clock. Welcome everybody. We really appreciate your being here. I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. I am an archivist, so I'm pretty structured, so I have some slides to begin our discussion. So welcome to our ArchivesSpace community discussion. I wanted to give you a sense of what we're going to be doing. We have about an hour, so I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of how we'll be using that time. First, we'll start off with some welcome and introductions. I am Laurie Gemmel-Arp. I'm the Director of Collection Services and Community Supported Software here at Lyrasis, so part of my portfolio includes the amazing ArchivesSpace and Collection Space, as well as digital and preservation services. We also have Christine DeBella here. You probably mostly know her. She's our amazing program manager, and she's here to help support with all the people participating. We also are very happy to have a couple board members here. Gordon Dames is currently the vice chair for the ArchivesSpace Board. Kat Stefko and Robert Miller, who might not be here quite yet but should be here soon, are also board members that have agreed to participate. I think we might have a few other board members here, which I'll point out later. So I'll spend just a few minutes giving you some background about the board and the topic. We'll talk a little about how the information will be used, and then we'll have the majority of the time for our discussion. I love this slide, so I use it whenever I get a chance. It's just a nice overview of the larger ArchivesSpace community and the ecosystem. As you'll see, at the heart of it is always the ArchivesSpace members, but there's lots of overlapping and intersecting parts of the community. Lyrasis is the organizational home. You'll see the governance board has a big role. A subsection of that is also the nominating committee. Also part of the larger governance is the user advisory council and the technical advisory council. But just wanted to point out the governance board and its role before I reminded everybody. We spend a lot of time with governance, but those members who are not actively working on governance might benefit from a little refresher on kind of the board's purpose. So the board's purpose, the ArchivesSpace Governance Board's purpose, is really to provide leadership for the ArchivesSpace community and to advise Lyrasis, the organizational home, on the ongoing development and support of ArchivesSpace. And as its role, the board sets membership policies, reviews, and approves.
That's right.
And it might not be clear to folks, but we're hearing some side conversation and feedback, so if you can mute, it's helpful if you can. And I say that with the, but I really hope later you unmute and discuss, but right now it's helpful. If folks aren't talking, then they mute. Thank you. So the board sets membership policy, reviews and approves budgets and resources, advises on program initiatives, but always with a strong focus on meeting the needs of a broad and diverse spectrum of archival institutions in a balanced and equitable manner. Board membership is mandated by the bylaws. It's governed by a 9-member governance board composed of 5 elected members, 1 member from each of the partner institutions. These were the partner institutions that were originally part of Archon or Archivist Toolkit. Those are NYU, UCSD, and UIUC, and also 1 member from the Lyrasis senior management team. The current board members we are fortunate in. I was trying to fit them on one page, but they all have such amazing roles and titles that it didn't fit. So here's page 1. Austin Booth is the Dean of Libraries at NYU. She's a project partner. She took over the role that Carol Mandel had for the last 5 years. The last 5 years within ArchivesSpace, much longer at NYU, I imagine. Peter Carini is the college archivist at Dartmouth, and he represents the medium membership level. Gordon Daines is currently our vice chair, soon to be our chair, and he is the special collections department chair at Brigham Young, and he represents the large membership level.
Do you know when Mommy will be here?
Oh, that's so cute. It's adorable when you hear little ones. I I think I was about to mention Cynthia Gearing. She's the director of the University Archives at Michigan State, and she represents the very large membership level. And then Robert Miller, the Lyris CEO, represents the organizational home on the ArchivesSpace Board. Page 2 of our amazing board members include Eric Mitchell. He is the university librarian at the University of California, San Diego, a project partner, and he took over for Brian Schottlander, who'd been on the board for the first 5 years. Newer to our board, we're very happy to have Kat Stefko. She has the longest title, hopefully I'll get it right, Associate Librarian for Discovery, Digitization, and Special Collections, and Director of the George J. Mitchell Department of Special Collections and Archives at Bowdoin College. She represents the small membership level. John Wilkin is currently our board chair. He is the Dean of Libraries and University Librarian at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and a project partner. And Nick, who is the most amazing person, who is very forgiving when I don't get his name pronounced properly each time. Nick Zemeski, archivist. See, every single time, and I write it down and it just doesn't stick, so he's amazingly patient with me. And we're particularly pleased to have him here today because hopefully he won't mind that I shared he's recently the father of twins, so his time is extra precious for us to have. He is archivist at the Industrial Archives and Library and represents the very small membership level. So just kind of a reminder of the board, the membership, and a little background about how we got here today. The board meets 4 times a year, twice in person, twice remotely. The last meeting we were talking about planning, particularly at the strategic level and kind of how we wanted to go forward. The first 5 years of ArchivesSpace were very much dealing with ground level issues and trying to make progress and making a lot, but thinking how do we want to go forward, thinking about how to be strategic, and the topic of strategic planning came up, and there was a certain amount of discussion about the frustrations of strategic planning, how everyone spends a lot of time on it. You make a 5-year plan, you put it on the shelf because immediately something comes and knocks you off your plan. So there was a lot of interest in wanting to be strategic, but also being agile and able to respond to more pressing or imminent concerns, but also plan for the long term. Really wanted to be transparent about the process. It's important to the board that they make sure that the members who they represent are aware of what's going on, and also really encourage feedback from the membership on topics. So we created this discussion to really better understand the high-level interests of concerns of members. So this is designed as your opportunity to raise strategic issues. This presentation part is pretty small. We're going to spend the vast majority of our time really focused on discussion. One of the questions that we thought would come up is, how will this information be used? And I can't quite tell if Robert is on the call yet. If he is, Robert, did you want to answer this question?
Sure. I think thanks, Laurie, for the intro. Internally at Lyris, is what we talk about is we say, if we can figure out what our members, we're a membership organization, thought leadership, technology focused, if we can figure out what our members want, we've done a good job. And this is part of what the board is coming back and saying, we want to make sure we hear on a variety of topics where you see us needing to go. At the end of the day, I think part of the responsibility of all of us, the TAC committee and others, is if we can identify as a community what we really need, not just what we want, we really elevated our chance of continuing to be successful in the future. So this is going to be part of aggregating requests together, and this is part of starting a two-way discussion and hopefully sideways, not just up and down, between the community itself and ultimately rolling up into the board. I'll pitch it back to you, Laurie.
Great, thanks, Robert. And really, that's our intro. If there's anything any of the other board members would like to mention, now's a great time. And then we also want to really open it up to you guys. We don't want us to be talking the whole time. We really want the members to be able to share amongst each other, but also with the board members, what the concerns are. So I'm going to stop the sharing so people can see each other and make sure that you can see Gordon and Robert and all the board members.
And I'm going to put on my hat as the nominating committee chair right now. And just if any of you are interested in getting more involved in the ArchivesSpace governance, we do have positions available on the User Advisory Council and the Technical Advisory Council. And we're accepting self-nominations as well as nominations of colleagues that might be of interest or use.
Excellent, Gordon. Thank you.
If I can toss out what's just, again, what happens behind the curtain. When Gordon speaks at a board meeting, it's really helpful for the board because Gordon has aggregated many voices, individual conversations, and what he does along with this team is try to help give guidance, waypoints, milestones, if you will, of what would help the community in terms of what they need. So we depend a lot on Gordon's role. So the type person I think should be on that. Doesn't want to wait for something to happen, wants to be a part of having it happen. Doesn't necessarily have to be super technical, but has to have an understanding of familiarity of use of archive space. I think it could be somebody who, like I said, comes not necessarily from an engineering or archivist background, but somebody who sees potential and breadth of where it could be going. Gordon, I think, is super easy to work with. We really welcome his voice. And it's a fun area to learn, gain more exposure, and perhaps help elevate your profile on a regional or national level with a program that might help you for future professional development.
All the board members are amazing to work with, I could say that. But we do want to make sure to turn it over to you guys if the members have particular strategic concerns, pressing concerns. We would love to hear them. Remember to unmute, and of course, if you turn on your camera, it's even more fun for everyone. Lydia.
Hi. I was just wondering about if there's any more news about the merger with DuraSpace. How's that going, and how does that impact ArchivesSpace?
Your timing is great because Robert said, should I talk about the merger? I'm like, no, this is about archives. But if they ask, then you can tell them. So it's a perfect segue.
Yeah. I've also opened up the chat line, so I've tucked in some things there. So yes, the very simple answer is we've announced, both boards have voted on an intent to merge. That was about 6 weeks ago. Tomorrow, our board is voting to officially go ahead with it, which starts a process which would culminate by June 28th that Fedora, DBA, doing business as DuraSpace, would become a part of Lyrasis. Thursday of this week, the day after Lyrasis votes, the DuraSpace board will vote. All signs point to yes. Process-wise, there is something called a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU. Ignore what our president talked about in the exchange several days ago with China about an MOU. He has it wrong. And then there's a term sheet which was developed in conjunction between Aaron Tripp, the executive director of DuraSpace, and myself, which is to ensure that, for example, DSpace, Vivo, and Fedora, that governance tactics, strategies, and plans that are in place will not be changed unless the respective community approves it. So we're excited. We went for an open forum period. We asked and secured feedback from various institutions. We're thrilled at not necessarily pushing the two organizations or pulling two organizations together, but really what the potential is of what we each can become. Top line, I think the opportunity to have more scale, to take on bigger programs, to try and link a broader set of communities together are things we find particularly attractive. DuraSpace has a strong representation in a lot of the research libraries, but they also have a representation with their 189 members across a number of smaller institutions. So there's a combination of attention being paid to individuals and institutions that have resources and some that have less resources. We're really thrilled. Laurie will play a key role in this in terms of what we're calling the DuraSpace Community Supported Program Division, where we'll have archive space, I'll talk about that in a second, collection space, DSpace, Vivo, Fedora, potentially ORCID, also a community-supported program. Simply E, which is going for public libraries. Simply E Academic, a small grant-funded project to see if we can take any of that software code and direction to try and enhance the reading experience for academic institutions. Short term, and I'm looking at Laurie when I say this, nothing's going to change with ArchivesSpace. The governance practice that's in place, the relationship ArchivesSpace has with lyricists will not change at all. So the same level of support, same level of high expectation, the same level of delivering value. But I think out of this, having 7/8 community-supported programs of various ilks, we can begin to ask questions like, do we need a separate POI for each one? How do we link the back ends? Are there things we can do with analytics that might be valuable for one organization? If CSpace works on this particular task, does A-Space have to work in duplicate and consume resources to do the same thing? How does Fedora handling this particular element? So I think it gives the community a chance to perhaps dream a little bit, to envision perhaps connections, intersections, new sets of dependencies or interdependencies, and really look from their institution's perspective about perhaps a new end-to-end solution they might not have been able to do. We think our missions are very closely aligned. In many cases, the staff have already worked with each other. So internally, we're very, very excited, really thrilled about it. Laurie, feel free to jump on and amplify or correct anything I might have said in error. But thanks for asking the question.
And from the lyricist perspective, we're very excited about having some closer connections with additional community-supported programs. I think ArchivesSpace is amazing, and so is CollectionSpace, but I think there's always things to learn from a better understanding of other programs, and maybe some synergies, like we all need to do automated testing, we all do training, we all do budgeting. Are there things that we could learn from each other that would really help us and just form those closer connections? So we're excited.
As guidance for some extra reading homework, if you'd like, Google the It Takes a Village. This was a IMLS program that was funded that Laurie was one of the co-sponsors on, and I think it allowed collectively the communities, plural, to really develop and begin to move toward a common vocabulary. And it was less about one community-supported or open source program was better than the other. I think what we learned through that was many of these have grown organically to take on challenges, realities, and visions that were slightly different from one another. So Laurie and team did a great job of collating this information. You'll see more of that, and that's going to influence a lot of how we carry on the discussions and conversations that DSpace has been having and Lyrasis has been having. Does that answer the question? Good, yeah. Thanks.
I think Lydia's silent, but Lydia, did you have any follow-up or further question on that?
All good.
All good, excellent. Other questions around the merger from other people, and then we'll move on, but I do want to make sure we cover that topic before we move on. We have 3 pages worth of people, so if somebody's waving their hand, I'm not seeing, so just feel free to speak up. If questions, great. Well, hopefully you're as excited as we are. Hopefully it'll move along quickly. Other topics, other strategic things that you're concerned about, that you would like the board to think about as we plan for the future. When we were talking about this presentation, or this, I'm sorry, not a presentation, a discussion, the board members did have some ideas of things that might be of interest to chat about. Kat, I think you'd had some experiences in working with others in Maine that might be a good bridge.
Can you hear me okay, Laurie?
I can.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not sure about my video.
No,
You
it's
can't
fine.
see me right. So first off, it's really great to have this many people with us. I'm a relatively new member of the board, as Laurie mentioned, and I very much consider myself learning the ropes. So it's really nice to be able to hear from the community about what their interests are. So I encourage you all to speak up. I had just mentioned one of the strategic directions that I'm personally interested in, and I think maybe other smaller institutions might find this appealing, is the public interface of ArchivesSpace, particularly as a surrogate for or the next version of some of these shared EAD repositories that people have grown up over the last decades or so. Maine was, Bowdoin is in Maine, for those of you who don't know, and we tried about 10 years ago to get a grant from NEH to have a shared EAD repository. We were close to successful, but not successful. And the project sort of died on the vine, but the desire to have shared discoverability never went away. So we've had some recent conversations in the state about potentially having a shared hosted solution. And this would do two things. It would allow smaller institutions that can't host their own archive space to have a place to contribute content. And then for bigger places, and when I say bigger, all the institutions in Maine are relatively small. So, but for places that already have archive space, like Bowdoin, this would give us a way of sharing our collection descriptions with other repositories throughout the state. So it would be sort of one-stop shopping for discovery of archival collections, similar to what we do for library collections through a Maine library organization.
Are other states or regions having similar questions, concerns?
This is Lydia. At Michigan State, we have two separate instances of ArchivesSpace, and it seems like this is something that we are going to continue into the future because of permissions. It's just a little bit easier to control that way. So I think having the ability to harvest the data from multiple distinct repositories like that in a consortium model, whether it's small or regional, would be very helpful.
Hey, Laurie, this is Robert.
Yes.
So I thought just to maybe stimulate or spark some conversation. Another way to look at this would be to say, what's working well that you just want to remind us not to change? What could be working better? Don't worry if it sounds like a strategic goal, high and lofty. It could just be, it should be easier if we could do this. I would appreciate that. Make sure you don't change this. Why can't we do this? There's general themes that come out of these are questions to start you thinking. General themes that come out of It Takes a Village that have to do with governance. There might be a revisiting of the technology or future proofing. How do I make sure that we don't fill in the blank? There's a section in the It Takes a Village that focuses on resources. Are any of your institutions hesitant to go forward because there might be a concern about the sustainability? That's a valid question. You don't have to have an answer. It doesn't have to sound smart. It just could be a concern, worry, or opportunity that you've been thinking about. Another direction might be to say, I don't know if this has anything to do with A-Space, but when I look at fill in the blank, that seems like it's working really well. Can we learn anything from that? That's a valid concern to bring up, or valid idea to bring up. Not that there's not an invalid one, but I go back to what Gordon brings into our board meetings. So it's a great chance now to add, if you can't or aren't able to think of anything right yet, but get an idea later, please pass that on. Some people might want to process and think about it a little bit later. I'll go back on mute.
Also, sometimes it's easier to put a comment or a question in the chat I don't think we're going to have a problem of too many people speaking at once, but sometimes that's a concern. So feel free to unmute microphones as you go, but also sometimes it's easier to write it out. So remember that there is a chat. Okay. Oh, gosh, there's two. Okay. We are interested in doing more with agent name records, particularly through EAC CPF exports. Can you give us an update on development priorities for agents EAC? And then wondering if that's maybe a better Christine answer.
Sure, I can talk about that. It's probably going to be a pretty short answer. So a number of you in the community might know that we have a community specification for agents. So we already have a very detailed specification. It has been prioritized, and it's some parts of that have been phased in development and the releases that have come out in the last year and a half. But kind of the biggest chunk of it, which is updating the schema of ArchivesSpace and updating the interfaces in ArchivesSpace to have the fields that are needed, to have all the data components that would work to make compliant EAC CPF records and more robust MARC XML records. That part we haven't gotten done yet. But I'm excited to say that we are in the process of working with the developer to get that done, hopefully by spring. So you should be able to do those things relatively soon in the application. But when there are community specifications and it's clear that it's a community priority, we definitely want to deliver that. It's just taken a little bit longer because of the complexity of this and kind of the level of knowledge of the application that it requires. But you'll be seeing that very soon, hopefully.
Do we have a theme around agents? Anybody have other questions about that or comments? And I see other questions, which is great, and we'll get to them soon. I just want to make sure that anybody that's interested in these topics, that we don't zoom through them too much. Chris has a fascinating question. How do we make sure ASpace doesn't get long in the tooth with regards to its technical platform? Maybe this isn't an issue. And Robert kind of put in the chat, it is a concern, this is critical, great question, long in the tooth. Are we looking into automatic record generation? How can we use AI to help the use of ArchivesSpace? So any of the board members or Christine or other members ArchivesSpace members certainly can chime in to expand this question or to give their thoughts on it.
So I would say, Laurie, the long in the tooth one, I think is, I don't think we need to have an answer. I think this is a great example of, we want the board to pay attention to that. I don't want to encourage or limit, the two-way. What I tossed in after that is, these are some things that, I would want to know, is there any interest in looking at AI? Is there any interest in looking at, voice? Is there any interest in mobile, in terms of utilizing ArchivesSpace? So, I have some thoughts on each of these, but I think this is where we have a chance to really have a good opportunity for the folks on the call to say, yeah, that's interesting to me, or it's not interesting.
So are other people interested or concerned about getting long in the tooth? I saw Gordon's hand move, and I wasn't sure if that was just shifting or a waved hand.
I think it's a huge concern to the board. I mean, the number one complaint I get whenever I talk to the membership is, I don't want to have to migrate, or migrating was a pain. So as long as we can keep the platform viable, I think, that's got to be one of our number one goals. We've allocated money towards this as a board. It's definitely something that's on our radar to try and make sure that we stay on a platform that's supportable into the future.
And the issue is not just supportability into the future, it's also, we want to make sure that we've got technology that allows ArchivesSpace to integrate with other tools that are out there. ArchivesSpace can't be everything for everybody, but we do want to make sure that it can connect to tools that archivists need. ArchivesSpace is probably not going to be a digital asset management tool, but it should be able to connect to whatever digital asset management tool you're using, whether that be through APIs or other ways.
And like everyone, I'm torn between trying to answer it and taking in the feedback. But the TAC, the governance board, and our tech lead are all very aware of the long-term concerns with technology, making sure it's, when you look at the roadmap, there's always different swim lanes, kind of trying to make sure that we keep progress on all these areas. There's always like feature enhancements and bug fixes, but there's also always infrastructure and things like automated testing and making sure that we're keeping all the different parts of ArchivesSpace updated as it should be. So some of the parts are less noticeable and fun, but it certainly is a concern. And when we hear you, that it's a concern to the community as well. So it's good to have it underscored. I see several questions. I'm sorry, I heard
I was
something.
just going to point out the last thing in the chat there is also related to this discussion, and it has to do with the frequency of updates or upgrades to ArchivesSpace. One of the things that we have been having discussions as a board about is when do we reach when is ArchivesSpace stable? And what we're doing is we're improving its ability to do its kind of core functions. Right now, a lot of the changes are being driven by the community. Recently, Lydia chaired I'm going to get the title wrong, the Staff Interface Enhancements Working Group to look at the staff interface, to make sure that we understand and are able to be responsive to the needs that you see as a community, to make sure that the interface actually works. I do agree that the frequency of the upgrades can be challenging. I periodically have my IT staff come to me and say, they've got another upgrade. What does this actually change? And do you really need this, or can we wait to the next upgrade? So that is a concern that we are talking about and trying to figure out. Obviously, we don't have a good answer yet.
Well, and one of the challenges always is, are they too slow or too fast? And there's always going to be too fast or too slow. We have really worked to try to highlight what's in the new release so you can have exactly that conversation that Gordon is talking about. So you can say, like, these are the 10 things that are in this new release and I don't care about any of them, so I'm happy where I am. Or I really, this feature was one I asked for, and so I want to get it as quickly as possible. I'm afraid that if we keep going further, we're going to miss some of the earlier questions, but I'll make a point. Related to long in the tooth question, what's the perception of the board concerning long-term maintenance work? How will ASpace solicit and financially support work that isn't visible in the form of features, but is desperately needed for long-term survival of the software? E.g., what if, say, documentation issues with database coherency, bugs that affect safe storage and migration of data, bugs that affect data, safe storage and migration of data, but cover less used cases? I think Robert has his hand up.
Sure. So I think it touches on an area that adds to what Nick and Gordon said about commitment to the program. There's a technology side commitment. Got to get these things done because they're really important. Another viability side, which I'm really proud of, that's the DuraSpace community at large has gotten behind, is our planning process, our budget process, and allocation of funds. So ArchivesSpace, you can tell what I'm thinking about. ArchivesSpace has enjoyed really good success by the community. The organizational home with Laurie and Christine and formerly Kim and Lainey have done remarkable work to keep and support the volunteer efforts of the other organizations. As such, there's a very strong fiscal platform that allows the board, with input from the community, to direct funds in areas that might not be popular but are necessary to get done. And there's extra resources to go ahead and do that. So call it a rainy day fund, call it a reserve, but it's an opportunity that things like this, as they bubble up to the surface, this is why we're asking the questions now of everybody, are really important for us to hear, so that we can make sure we can apply resources to the things that are needed and wanted today, and the things that might not be seemingly as critical, but eventually become friction points with taking the program further. So I think it's a great question, really, really spot on.
I want to make sure we go back to some of the earlier comments, but before we do, anybody have any more comments on that one? Harvard is asking about interoperability. Interoperability is a concern. I'd like to see ArchivesSpace be able to ingest LC names. The AS model is more granular than MARC. So this is actually one of the things that we kind of were hoping would come up, is kind of talking to other systems. So how important is it? Which systems are most important to you?
This is probably a good time to point out that the Technical Advisory Committee has a group that does integrations, and they're tracking integrations. Right under the Harvard question is one about Archivematica. You might want to contact Max Eckert at the University of Michigan. I know they've been looking at integrating their version of ArchivesSpace with Archivematica, but that integrations list that's available through the tech does deal with some of those things. And +1 to the comment about integrating with LC.
And as we've kind of talked about, one of the approaches the board and the program team have taken is ArchivesSpace is designed to help archivists with their work. It's tempting to start to do other things. It's tempting to be a digital preservation system. It's tempting to be a digital image management system. But there are other systems that do that really well. So generally, the approach has been, let's let those systems do what they do well. Let's focus on making ArchivesSpace the best it could be, and then integrating those systems so that over time, those workflows are more and more seamless to the archivist. But it is one of those balancing of how, constantly improving ArchivesSpace while working to integrate with other systems, some of which are proprietary, which really limits how much they kind of have to control how much we integrate. But the integrations are important, and so that's why I was asking about them. And I did see somebody put in the chat, ALMA and other ILSs are hugely important. So that's nice because there's so many things to integrate with. Sometimes it's helpful to help us prioritize which systems are most important. Is there a chart or map of these systems and how they integrate? I think that's a great question to ask about the roadmap. In the roadmap, we update every time we put out an update, every time we put out a release. And we have in there things that are essentially scheduled to be done, things that we'd like to get done, and things that we're looking for resources to help get done. And integrations are one that are valuable, but the more feedback we get about what's valuable to you helps us. And Gordon helpfully put in the integration sub-team of the TAC. Gordon, do you want to mention what they'll find there?
What's available there are minutes of the discussions of what they're looking at in terms of integrations, and I believe they also in one of their minutes have a list of known integrations with ArchivesSpace and who the people are working on those integrations.
The integrations group, just to continue on that, a lot of the work that they do is not like the actual development work on these things, but the incredibly important work of mapping out what people want and why, what are some best practices if you're thinking about an integration, kind of collating that information and being representatives of the community in those initiatives. So that is a wonderful group to reach out to or to express your concerns or your interests to, so that information can all be kind of in the same place.
But I think what we're hearing are integrations are important. So that is what we thought and helpful to have it underscored. And some nice resources. Other questions or comments, particularly on integrations? I see a comment from Vivian Lee, which is such a great name. One thing that would be helpful with new updates is to have it clearly marked so we'll know if we must install the upgrade or if we can pick it up in a later one. I think when the releases go out, they tend to say that, but are there ways to make that clearer? If you're not seeing it, then it's not very helpful. So are there mechanisms, Vivian Lee, that would make that clearer to folks?
Laurie, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hi. Because I am a lone arranger and I am having to work with my IT partner in our IT department, you know, they have, like Gordon mentioned, they have been coming at me with really, how many upgrades are there going to be? And of course, the fear is always that if we skip one, we might miss critical code that if we don't update, we're not going to be able to install subsequent updates or upgrades. And honestly, it's not clear. Maybe we're not looking in the right place, but we're not seeing that language that says, if you skip this, it's okay, you know, that this code will be in a subsequent upgrade. You know, and if we know that every upgrade must be installed to get all the functionality, then that's just what we have to deal with.
But it's a great question because this is the strife that we have when we're planning releases. Like if you fix something, you want it to get out there as soon as possible for the frustrated people that are waiting for a fix, but you're trying not to torment the people that have to upgrade. And so we definitely are aware that we don't want to have every upgrade need to be installed, but we're clearly not communicating well enough to the community about where that is. I think it's in the announcements, but maybe it needs to go in release notes, or where would you look for such information? Where are you expecting to find that?
Well, the question for me would be, where would my IT partner expect to find it? And so I would turn to those who are dealing more with the technical side, because what happens is when I get the email saying that a new version is available, I forward that to my IT partner and he makes that happen. You know, I'm right now very focused on the data migration because I'm coming out of an ancient DOS-based system. So, oh yeah. So that would be a question for him. But even if it was, you know, in the release email, if there was like a blanket statement that would always be there, then I would know, oh, I don't have to forward this on to my partner. You know, I could just...
But you'd rather be able to make that decision without even having them have to look at it.
Well, no, I will always have him look at it because I think of him as the technical driver. I am the content. I'm the archivist, so I'm the one who's going to decide ultimately what we do. But I have to rely on his tech savvy to make that happen. I just don't have the time to wear that hat as well.
Definitely, and most people do not, so right. Totally understand. And this is one of the debates that we have, like how many, and it's easy at the beginning of the year to say we'll have 2 or 12 or 6, but then something comes up. And again, when we do fix something or have some new functionality, we always want to share it. So we need to be better about clarifying what's necessary and what's in it so that you can make those decisions.
Right. Thank you.
Good to know. Okay, I'm worried I'm gonna miss some of the comments. A staff member noticed some outdated files from previous upgrades, such as different versions of the same gem. Is there a plan to consolidate these? And this is where I know just enough to get into trouble, because I remember talking to Lainey about gem files. And I'm gonna ask Christine if she could speak more clearly to this. If she can't, we'll just get Lainey and follow up with you with the answer.
I think I can speak in general about it, but maybe not to the very specifics of it. But in general, like part of what was being talked about earlier in terms of the ongoing maintenance of the application and the things that are maybe a little bit less exciting, that they don't result in new functionality in the application, but they have to get done. that's definitely something we're paying attention to all the time. But definitely, just as we have limited resources for putting new functionality in the application, we also have limited resources for that kind of maintenance work as well. So it is definitely something that is always on our radar in terms of planning. When there's something that absolutely has to go because it's a security problem, that gets prioritized for being moved out of the application or being improved. But certainly, just as we're responsive to community concerns about functionality, we're also responsive if you notice something that's wrong that way. So definitely bring it to our attention. You can file a JIRA for that, just as you would file a JIRA for a function, a feature request that you want. Same kind of thing.
And we do have the the development prioritization council subteam. I always get the nomenclature wrong on the group that's across, it has people from TAC and UAC, and Lydia actually chairs that. I don't know if this is an opportunity to talk about how they prioritize things in terms of critical functionality, errors, user interest, how hard it is to fix.
Yeah, all right. Just a little update that Maggie Hughes is now also our co-chair from TAC. And so basically what we do as the co-chairs is every single month we have a meeting, and as the co-chair, what we do is we survey the Kanban boards for both feature requests and bugs. And so this is when the tickets in JIRA have the status of either awaiting prioritization or awaiting more information. And within this, both of us try to draw a mixture of both awaiting prioritization, as in these new tickets, and also the awaiting more information to keep moving these tickets along so they don't get stuck too long. And so we try to do a big mixture of just sometimes some very minor details, but also prioritize the more pressing concerns. So there's a way for reporters to rank the priority of these tickets, the urgency of it, but there's also ways that we also discuss it within the meeting as well. And so we always try to make sure to incorporate the feedback of Laura and Lainey. And also, I feel one of the strengths of this team is the diversity of its members, coming from both Users Advisory Council as usually staff interface users, as well as Technical Advisory Council, which has more of a technical perspective on things. I hope this is helpful.
I thought it was very nice of you, Lydia, because I totally put you on the spot, but I think it's nice that it's understood that part of governance is that we do share those decisions with the community. So thank you.
So yeah, if people have concerns, if they have ideas for the way for new features, or if they identify bugs or issues with the program that they really want to see fixed, then please go ahead and fill out tickets and we'll look over them. So thank you. Also, if you find tickets that you have an opinion on, what you can do is comment in the tickets. You can also say vote on it to say, yes, yes, I want that one. Or you can, if you want to be a little bit more non-committal but still keep track of that issue, then you can click watch it. And so that way you will be emailed every single time somebody comments on the ticket, or else as the ticket moves through the whole process. So what we do during our meetings is we put it into ready for implementation, which means that's ready to go. That's ready for developers to take it on whenever they have the availability, or else we may move it to close or put it back to awaiting more information.
Thank you so much, Lydia.
Thank you.
And I see, unless anybody has a comment, I see a good question about collection space. So I think Harvard was commenting on integrations with ALMA and ILS, and then said, are there any synchronicity planned for collection space and archive space to meet collections management needs? Love the word synchronicity in that context. Before I answer, are there other people that are interested, particularly in collection space? Yes, CAT is excellent. So it is another program we have, and we're always trying to, nope, that's a separate question that we'll get to in a minute. It is something that we're chatting about, and I don't know if Robert wants to answer it or I can. I will. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Catalyst Fund. It's a Lyrasis grant program where members get the opportunity to put in projects and ideas for projects. And somebody did put an idea for a project that's related to ArchivesSpace collection space integrations. When you say integrations, everybody gets excited, but trying to figure out how they would map is the tricky part. And so somebody put in an idea about particularly the authorities that would be shared, because this institution gets a lot of things that are either coming in from the archival side or the collection side, but the authorities are of interest. And so their idea is authority space in between archive space and collection space. It would be part of an integration. So definitely of interest. I'm hopeful that that one will move along. But with all of these projects, particularly integrations, the more participation we have from the community and interest, the more helpful it is. And I see lots of comments. So just to make sure that Robert's comment gets added in there with the collection space, he adds that end users, museums are quite keen to use both A space and C space. That's the wave of the future as we see less silos, more joint usage. But I am happy to hear a vote for C space integrations, so thank you. And the more, I keep saying this, but the more we hear from you that it's important, it helps us to prioritize. Okay, I want to make sure we go back. Bill G is asking, is there a chart or map of these other systems and how they integrate? Oh, and then Gordon answered and Christine answered. And then Bill says, is there a list of other package and what do? I'm guessing that's related to his first question. If it's separate, I'm not quite understanding it. So Bill, if you want to expand on that, either on the out loud or in the chat, we can certainly cover it. Edgar included the latest integrations. Bill is asking, we need physical and digital management with version control, what's out there and what integrates with ArchivesSpace. So I'm guessing, Bill, this is more of like digital asset management and how it integrates with ArchivesSpace, and you're looking to understand which systems do that? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Bill said yes. So I think Christine and Gordon are closer to the integrations. Do you know if those are on any of those lists, or if they are, they would be on those resources?
So it depends. I'm very archivist-y saying it depends, but on your particular situation, there is the possibility of using Islandora, say, or Archivematica. If you're, I think in your use case, Bill, probably Archivematica is not as useful. Islandora, we're very interested in the potential that the merger has for making DSpace maybe a better alternative in terms of an integration. So there are things out there. That might be a question that's better kind of directed to us individually after the call. We'd be happy to talk with you about that.
Great. And I see a good question about ArchivesSpace has lots of good tools to create new records, client and or import. However, I'd like to see additional work on easily being able to edit records in the system. And it looks like Vivian Lee, I just love that name, agrees. I'm spending tons of time on my data in Excel before importing because I find it easier and faster than editing in A-Space. That sounds like there's definite interest. Are there other people with similar concerns around editing existing records?
Yes. I really admire Harvard's Excel like importer for batch importing archival objects. And that's great for adding in a lot of sometimes pre-existing data, or say if you're working with students that you don't want to give them a lot of permissions to work directly with the database. But having the ability to bulk edit things once it's in, it would be very helpful, in my opinion.
Ooh, there's like a flurry of yeses, definitely yes, +1, rapid entry, editing, big scale. Okay, you guys are excited about this one. This is definitely a theme. Talk to archivists about editing and you touch a nerve. I say that as an archivist. We need to edit locations in ArchivesSpace and are trying to see how to do that in bulk. That's what I'm using. Major shout out to Bobby Fox, who was on the call. Bulk edit function would be helpful. Yes to editing trouble. If bulk edit isn't immediately possible, we would love a way to export ArchivesSpace back to Excel for batch edits. Agreed. Chattanooga has experimented with our own batch import workflow as well. Having the ability to export it back out would be helpful. I second the export back to Excel for cleanup or adding. There's definitely interest, and this was part of, I don't know how the acronym goes, but it's the staff interface.
Enhancement working group. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly on the status of that though.
And you're asking maybe in the chat about maybe it wasn't specific enough. And that is always one of the things when we get feedback, is making sure, like, it's easier to say, like, this would be great, but specifics are what we need to give a developer to make it so. So I'll let Christine answer this one.
Yeah, I think actually in this case, we do have the specifics. So I think the staff interface group recommendations were really wonderful in this area, and this is definitely something that we know people want. We know that there are lots of great tools for getting information into the system from outside, but once you get it into the system, it can be very tedious to edit records within the system. So frankly, what's kind of holding us up are developer resources on this one. We know it's something people really want. We know it's something we want to make happen. We don't quite yet have, it's sort of a thing to get done. We'd need to put other things to the side with the level of resources that we have for developers right now. But maybe sometimes there are things that, yeah, we should just put everything to the side if this is what people really want us to focus on. So I'm definitely not opposed to that. But what's holding us back now is not so much specificity, but level of developer resources.
And so we're almost at the end of our time, but I don't want to cut off the conversation. And there's a very good question, given that we have several board members here. Are there any plans to increase resources for development? So I can give my answer, but I'm not a board member.
Oh, go ahead. Take it, Laurie, and I'll do follow-up for you.
So we're in the process of starting the budgeting process. And so every year we look at, what our membership and what our resources are and what we need to get done. And so that development is what we always prioritize. Now, some years we get further than others because there's challenges. We were really, really pleased this year to be able to add Laura as a junior developer, so that Lainey's been doing an amazing job as the tech lead and really creating an infrastructure to help more community development occur and putting in the core committers to help review that. But that's always challenging to do development and manage that. We have a co-op intern that we've had for the last year. She's been amazing. So I think over the last year, we've really upped those resources. So now this year when we go through the budget cycle again, it's like, okay, what can we do? What resources do we have to bear? But there is a challenge between having money and finding the right person to do it. We've also added another contract developer that we've worked with this year, and they've been amazing. So it's a matter of finding the right mix of money and skills. So having said that, always more contributions welcome, and we're always looking for ways to get more developments in our budget. But any board members can comment on that.
Yeah, Laurie, this is Robert. I would say yes to what you said. And Laura, I forgot to call your name out when I was talking about the dynamite ArchivesSpace team. So yes, you're part of that crew. What I'm hoping, Laurie, is the noise, maybe the awareness that will come from the DuraSpace Lyrasis merger would attract people to say, this sounds like a really interesting opportunity to be a part of. Again, I point back to Gordon. I think what ArchivesSpace has done a really interesting and good job of, as I've looked across other open source communities and programs, is code contribution. And we always hope that it would come more organically from within the community that the solution is serving, or that we can attract people due to the impact that open source program, community supported program like ArchivesSpace, CSpace, DSpace, Vidora, and Vivo would all have. So we're hoping that this awareness of what we're trying to do for the benefit of the memberships by combining these programs together, Laurie will help our phone to ring or our email basket to fill up. So I'll end with that.
I feel defensive every time I say this, but I'm just going to point it out. It's a complicated data model to have a developer jump into. So it is one of our challenges, is trying to find the right skill set. So I think we've made a lot of progress in that, but there's certainly more to do. I think Gordon had to sign off. He says, thank you for the feedback. It's been really helpful and will inform our governance board discussions. Any other things that you really want to make sure the governance board is aware of as we go into budgeting and strategic planning and all our future discussions? I'm going to chat for a minute, so feel free to type. Certainly, as you think of other things, feel free to reach out to any of us. We really appreciate everyone participating and giving us the feedback. It really is, we want to make sure that we're hearing from members as we plan, and so the best way to hear that is for you to tell us. So we appreciate your participation and the ideas.
I did have one more question.
Sure.
So I guess I'm trying to think, as an open source program, how is the board planning to continue to assist repositories that, like very lone arrangers, that may not be able to join with full membership? So for example, to implement and utilize the program.
This is Robert, so I'll take a crack at it. I think in some ways it's very easy, in some ways it's very hard. One of the successes, I think, and I was excited when I joined Lyrasis to see the fine work that had been done by the community, some of them at the board level, the Carol Mandels and Brian Schottlanders, and so forth, who have really contributed at early stages the vision of ArchivesSpace. There has always been, I think, a thought to make sure that at first level it's sustainable, and right behind that, how do we make sure it's obtainable by institutions of various sizes or individuals of various sizes. In the beginning, I think there was really a struggle to make sure that we were clear we couldn't be all things to everybody at the beginning. I think what we've tried to do is ensure that from a representation standpoint, institutions that have limited budgets are able to have their voice heard on the board. And I think we've been very visible with that. I think we've been very deliberate in terms of trying to ensure there's diversity and representation, not only of the standard areas, but I think also of age, I think of experience, and I think of exposure. And I think the board's worked really hard and is committed to that in a deliberate fashion. I think the next thing that we're talking about is to make sure that we have vehicles in place to capture that next ring going out. So this isn't going to be the answer I'd want to give, because I think if I were you, I'd want to have it be crisper. But I would say it's very much a topic of the discussion. I'm not committing the rest of the board, but I know it's important from the level of the board chair, Dean of NYU. At Lyricist, we represent organizations big and small. And I think we want to make sure that it's not just the voice, but it's a participation side with it. At the end of the day, it is open source software. At the end of the day, it can be downloaded. I think the success of the community has come in large part because those that can contribute do. The responsibility that the board has on behalf of the membership is to always ensure that we're showing value. So that's probably, like I said, that's probably a fuzzier answer than I would want to hear, but that's how I would take a stab at answering it. And please give me feedback if you need me to try and sharpen or crisp it.
And just from my perspective, I think it really is a concern of the board. 2 of the board members are voted, they represent smalls and very small members. And I'll let Nick comment on that, but it's a topic that comes up at every board meeting. There are specific endeavors that we've done. The implementation buddies is largely because some of the smaller institutions said, like, implementation is too big. The whole idea that there is a hosting model is because the board was very concerned that it not just be the big kids who could host themselves, but smaller institutions. It's one of the reasons we don't just have the annual member forum, that we have the regional member forum and the online forum. So those lone arrangers who can't go to SAA and spend a week in Austin this week and come to the member forum can do one of the regional ones or the online ones. It's one of the reasons we have the blog entries and the Zoom calls and the webinars, so that people from smaller institutions aren't, who are able to participate in different ways. I know it was a concern that Christine Kim was working on and our new engagement person will work on, but I should let Nick answer because he is actually the person who represents many of these.
Yeah, I do think that, it's a challenge to get up and running. We looked at this program for 3 months and had no idea what the heck we were doing. It wasn't until we attended an in-person training at William and Mary. But not everyone can do that, and those in-person trainings don't come up all the time. It's a concern. It's something that, we'd like people to be able to reach out to other members who are experienced. The implementation buddies thing really grew out of a lot of concerns and comments that were brought to my attention as a board member. The very smalls and the smalls are really the groups that speak out when we email all of our constituents, or are more willing to share concerns than some of the other membership levels. And so I do think that the board is very well aware of some of the issues that we have implementing, some of the issues lone arrangers have. I'm in the same boat as you guys with integrations and trying to figure out what's the best direction for my institution to go in, and what's going to play nicest with ArchivesSpace and give me the most value for money and be easy to work with. So I do think that we raise this at every board meeting. Any chance I get where a topic that has been brought up to me comes up in a board meeting, we always try and address it. It's not easy. But once you get going, I think the program is very simple to, in my opinion, simple to use for what we're doing once that initial familiarity and initial hurdle is gotten over. So the more we can do to get you over that hurdle, the better. And even just updating the documentation, as we talked about different versions, not everyone's on the same version at any point. The documentation could be for a version that's, a few releases ago, the training videos. It's hard to keep everything at the most current level. And I think that's probably what frustrates a lot of people. I know it frustrated me when we first started.
And it's when we talk about the smaller folks from the smaller institutions participating, it's in all levels. We want people from smaller institutions to be able to join and be members and to use the software, but it's also one of our challenges that we want them to be more represented on the councils and the working groups. And sometimes it's a challenge for them to just have the time to do that. It's just harder when you're a lone arranger to say, sure, I'll spend so much of my time on prioritization committees or updating documentation. But it is one of the things that we take very seriously, that it's in the board goals to make sure that we're representing all these different groups and making sure no archive gets left behind. And so as you have suggestions and ideas for ways to make it easier, like one of the things we're doing now is the installer is a technical solution to make it easier to get started. But there's ways to make it easier for training by putting it online, ways to participate in online sessions, technical things to make it easier. So we take suggestions seriously and are always interested in trying to improve the experience for all the members.
Great.
And I think Robert is asking, thanks to the community who participated, Lydia, I think he's asking Lydia, can you email me at Robert Miller to keep kicking this around? And Chris says, thank you for the convening and the good community session. And thank you all so much for participating. It doesn't work without you guys. We're just staring at ourselves otherwise. But feel free to email or contact us, and particularly with specific suggestions about how to make it easier for different size members to participate. We are always striving for that. Thanks. This will all go into our future discussions for the board. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.